Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and you've found your way to Kinda Murdery, a place that means more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. I am your host Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. Before we get rolling here, a couple quick announcements. I was lucky enough to be part of the annual Hillbilly Horror Stories Halloween special that came out on Thursday, October 20th. So please go listen to Hillbilly Horror Stories, find the Halloween special, and check me out along with a lot of other great podcasters. Also, coming up this Thursday, October 27th, I'll be guesting on British Murders with Stuart Blues. So on Thursday, go check out British Murders to hear a kinda murdery version of that show, where Stuart and I will cover the tale of the murderous doctor, Holly Harvey Crippen. Alright, on to today's show. We have reached the final chapter, part 4 of The Chicago Horror, Leopold and Loeb. Now notice that I said part 4, so if you haven't heard parts 1 through 3 yet, go back and listen to them, catch up, and then rejoin us. We'll save you a seat. And if you're all caught up, well then, you know what time it is. Put your personal items underneath the seat in front of you. Store your carry-on in the overhead compartment. Let the cares of the day drift away, but make sure you have your seatbelt fastened, because there's turbulence expected ahead. Kinda Murdery starts now. The inseparable Mulroy and Goldstein were not letting the grass grow under their feet. Again, they were riding in cabs, with fearful eyes on the meter, this time in quest of a drugstore from which Mr. Johnson had phoned the Franks' home concerning directions for the delivery of the ransom money. The process was fatiguing. From all appearances, the particular drugstore was not in the immediate vicinity, for queries in several drugstores thereabouts yielded nothing. The two proceeded further east on 63rd Street. They paused before the establishment of a C.M. Ross at 1465 East 63rd Street. To go in or not to go in? That was their question. "I think we've played this thing out," said a tired Goldstein. "Well, let's give it one more turn," answered Mulroy, a little hopefully, whereupon the two entered more in the spirit of adventure than business. They sought out Mr. Ross himself. "Yeah, Mr. Ross is here, I'll call him," said the clerk. The proprietor appeared in the person of a short, thick-set, middle-aged man. He beamed upon his callers. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" "We're newspaper reporters," Mulroy began. "We're trying to trace a telephone call to some drugstore in the neighborhood in connection with the Franks murder. Do you have any information that might help us?" "The Franks murder?" asked the startled druggist, following it up with the question, "Do you think somebody called from here?" "Well, it's just possible. You see, it might have been that message was left with a clerk or someone to be given to a well-dressed man or something like that. Could you say?" The proprietor stroked his chin in thought. Then his eyes opened wide. He tried to speak, but in his excitement could only stutter over unintelligible consonants. In a moment, he had gone to the cashier's desk and was back again, bearing a sealed envelope. This letter," he stammered, "left here for a man. They said the man would ask for it and he'd have a cigar box in his hands." Mulroy tore open the envelope with nervous fingers and found a single sheet of plain stationery, upon which was typed the following message: "Go direct from here to the Illinois Central Depot on 63rd Street. A ticket agent there will hand you a ticket on the Michigan Central, which will arrive 20 minutes after you get in the depot. Board the southbound train. Your seat will be on the right-hand side as specified on the ticket." There was no signature and no further details. "Much obliged to you," said Mulroy. "These are the instructions to Mr. Franks for the delivery of the ransom money for his son. You've helped us a great deal, and probably the state's attorney, too. Do you know who brought this note in?" "Oh, why, it was a young boy," replied Ross. "I never saw him before. He simply said a man would stop in for the note and that he'd have a cigar box in his hand. That's all I know about it." "Well, it's something anyway," put in Goldstein. "Let's be off, Jim. The state's attorney will want that note, and we have to check on that typewriter stuff yet." Another letter intended for Mr. Franks containing specific information as to the disposal of the ransom money was later discovered on the train which the father of the murdered boy was directed to take. Early the next morning, State's Attorney Crow renewed his questioning of Leopold, who had slept apart from Loeb in a room guarded all night by the State's Attorney detectives. Once more, Leopold was seated at a table opposite his quizzer. "Have you ever owned a typewriter?" queried the prosecutor. "Yes, I have," was the answer. The voice today was not so reassuring. Perhaps some of the self-confidence had deserted young Leopold. "Well, what kind?" "A Hamilton Portable." "Sure of that?" "Well, I've had it for a long time, long enough to know." "Where is it now?" "At home, in my room." "Let's go get it then," said the State's Attorney, rising and taking his coat. In a few minutes, Leopold was back in his home, but under far different circumstances than ever before. The suspected genius led the police party up to his room, and they watched him while he went about the business of producing the Hamilton typewriter. "It seems to have been taken," Leopold announced after looking vainly through closets and shelves. "It was here, I know it was." "You're lying," Crow cut in. "You never had a Hamilton. The truth is you had an Underwood. Where is it, Leopold?" The youth registered displeasure at the outburst. "I am telling the truth. I'm trying to help you. If someone has taken the typewriter, what am I to do?" Cross-examined further on the possible destiny of the typewriter, Leopold suddenly remembered he had loaned it to a fellow student on May 15th. The borrower, he stated, took it with him to Ann Arbor, Michigan. It was a matter of moments for the detectives to check up on the truth of that statement. They reported back that the parents of the student had taken their son to an Ann Arbor-bound train on May 11th. Crow then charged Leopold point-blank with having destroyed or buried the writing machine. Leopold denied it. Headquarters of the investigating authorities were moved back to the criminal court building on Chicago's north side, and here, Loeb and Leopold were brought for what the state's attorney termed a final showdown. He had certain evidence in his possession, he said, which neither of the youths could explain away to his satisfaction. Pending very imminent results from investigation along other lines, he would continue to hold them in custody. By nightfall of May 25th, 3 days after the murder of Robert Franks, the shadow of that ghost, habeas corpus, which haunts every detective's dreams, was hovering over the criminal court building. The parents of Leopold and Loeb had retained the eminent lawyer, Clarence Darrow, and he served notice upon the state's attorney that unless his clients were booked or released, he would institute habeas corpus proceedings. Clarence Darrow was the most famous defense attorney of the age, also notorious, or known, for defending John Scopes at the legendary Monkey trial. And now he's stepped in on behalf of Leopold and Loeb. Insofar as Crow, the state's attorney, was confident that no judge would grant bail to Loeb and Leopold in view of the murder charge, he was not frightened by Darrow's threat, but it served to spur his aides to great activity. With the passing hours, the old court structure buzzed more and more with life and action. Investigators were bringing in tips, possible witnesses, suspects, samples of clothing, old typewriters, fake license plates, and whatnot. Other detectives were reporting what they had heard, found, or checked upon, while reporters dived in and out among them, cursing the reticence of some and the talkativeness of others. Toward midnight, it was rumored about the court building that Loeb and Leopold were getting a final grilling. Captain Shoemaker had made a mighty score, it was said, when he obtained from Sven England, chauffeur to Leopold, the damning statement that Leopold's red Willie's Night car had not been out of the garage on the day of the murder from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. In an outer room of the state's attorney's office, a large and curious throng had gathered. They were reporters, policemen, prominent citizens, and workers in the building. Their eyes and ears were concentrated on the inner office where Loeb and Leopold were getting everything that Crow could pack into English. None other than Mulroy and Goldstein did the unspeakable thing of exploding the tension that had held all others spellbound. Wild-eyed, nearly panting, and very much bent upon seeing the state's attorney in person, they burst upon the scene. The clumsy situation was not without its humor. Rival reporters hurled sarcastic greetings. "Well, if it ain't O'Connor and Goldberg here, it's the Gold Dust Twins!" Undaunted, the Cubs made their way to the Sanctum Sanctorum and were admitted. Then, to the state's attorney, they unfolded the results of their chase, which had taken them over some 200 miles of city streets, by cab. With them, they carried typewritten theses written by Leopold while he was at the University of Chicago, on the identical machine that turned out the famous ransom letter. The state's attorney assured his prisoners there was little more for them to do except confess. With the hope of achieving this, he and Assistant State's Attorney John Sparborough renewed questioning of Leopold in one room, while Chief of Detective Hughes and Assistant Professor Savage examined Loeb in another. The latter's cocksure, flip-in-the-face attitude had deserted him entirely. Dickie Loeb was quaking and evinced a carelessness of being caught in one lie after another. Both Leopold and Loeb, according to the estimates of the state's attorney, gave their confessions at the same time, though they were in completely different rooms. Completely broken, Loeb and Leopold were confronted with one another for the last time while their statements were made known to each other. Leopold was silent, sullen. Loeb seemed sick at heart and batted not so much as a rebellious eyelash. His was an attitude of abject surrender. On hearing the other's statement, these two, who had been inseparable friends in high school, university, and college, glowered with hatred at one another as they sat across the table, listening with disgust to the confessions that had been wrung from them, word for word. Theirs was the original perfect murder plot, conceived in the aura of a Superman to whom everything but self-desire and perfection are nothing. Theirs was, or rather was to be, the world's first perfect crime, execution of which would make the names of Loeb and Leopold awful and glorious to hear 1,000 years in the future. Unfortunately for them, all that was to be was not. The stark realities of human living were breaking into the great dream. A boy had been murdered. Society knew no supermen. It demanded retribution. As early as November 1923, according to their confession, Loeb and Leopold conceived the plan for a crime which would never be solved. Both agreed at the outset that they would kidnap and murder their victim, who oddly enough was selected just 2 minutes. 2 minutes. What terrible fate. Before the killing was done. The scheme was one of the most elaborate in the history of criminal annals. Provision for escape was as well guarded as the design of the murder. To begin with, Leopold spent several nights in the Morrison Hotel Chicago for the express purpose of registering under a false name and establishing a dual identity. He did this again in the Trainier Hotel and in hotels in Peoria and Morris, awarding the unusual scheme a finishing touch by opening savings accounts in several banks under a name other than his own. Thus, on being hard-pressed by pursuers, if any, he said, they would have refuge in the hotel while the savings in the several banks would be a sort of contingency fund. 2 months before being dispatched, the ransom letter was written by Leopold. At the time, neither had the slightest conception of who would play the part of victim in this unparalleled drama of murder and conspiracy. Leopold admitted composing the letter, which, as anticipated by the police, he had based upon the character of the ransom letter published in a detective story magazine. In corroboration of this, Captain Shoemaker produced the particular issue of the magazine, which was found in a drawer of the dresser in Leopold's room. In the next step, the two youths procured the tools necessary to do the actual murder. Loeb went to the hardware store and purchased an 8-inch chisel, one end of which he wrapped with adhesive tape taken from the medicine cabinet in his home. Oh my God, a chisel? Oh my God. The wisdom of using a padded chisel lay in the fact that on being applied to the victim's head with discreet blows, it would inflict concussions of the brain and serve the double purpose of confusing the cause of death and bewildering the coroner's physician. In accordance with the plans, Loeb had also purchased a quantity of hydrochloric acid which was to be poured upon the victim's face with the view of frustrating identification. My God, all of this, chisel murder of a child, burning his face off with acid, just for the intellectual exercise of proving to themselves that they could do it, selecting a victim more or less at random from young children that they knew. These guys are pure evil. Man, it's bumming me out. But I guess we get to continue to keep finding out just how evil they are when Kinda Murdery returns after the break. Hey everybody, we're back. Thank you for taking a moment to support the brands that support Kinda Murdery. And speaking of supporting Kinda Murdery, another reminder that I just had the honor of being on the Hillbilly Horror Stories 5th annual Halloween special alongside a lot of other great pods. Please do check out Hillbilly Horror Stories. I think you'll really dig it. And this coming Thursday, October 27th, I'll be joining Stuart Blues for a Kinda Murdery edition of his show, British Murders. So do check out British Murders as well. As you know, I have cerebral palsy, and it is my hope that Kinda Murdery can be a platform for people with disabilities, whether they be physical or otherwise, or just other unique struggles in life, to share their stories, so that we can all understand each other better and build more empathetic responses. Also, please do remember the free 3-digit number, 988, that you can call to receive immediate counseling for substance use, mental health issues, or suicidal thoughts. 988, a free lifeline that you should program into your phone. And God forbid you ever need it, but if you do, please call it. Always remember that the world is a better place with you in it. If you're in acute crisis, call 988. If you're just feeling down and you'd like to connect with someone, please do feel free to reach out to me, kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on all social media. I care. I'm here for you. And please do reach out to share your stories. Also, everybody, if you have ideas for stories that you would like to hear, if you have favorite kind of murdery stories, crimes, murders, bizarre things, paranormal stuff, whatever you want to hear, reach out to me at kindofmurdery@gmail.com and let me know. I'm here to make you happy. I will do it. Shout out to Wayne Pierce, who reached out and has given me several great suggestions, including John List, Ma Barker, and the Cray twins, Ronnie and Reggie Cray. Great ideas, Wayne. I look forward to covering those stories at some point. Everybody, follow Wayne's lead, send me your favorite stories, and let me know if you would like to hear me start covering some more recent, more modern crimes. I know I do a lot of historical stuff, and I love the historical stuff, but I'm also excited to do news stories as well. So if you have a recent crime story that you'd like to share, please do. Again, kindofmurdery@gmail.com or at kindofmurdery on all social media. And of course, please do leave reviews. They make a big difference. All right, the seatbelt sign has been turned on. Please return to your seat and buckle up. There's turbulence expected ahead because Kinda Murdery resumes now. 1 week before the day of the kidnapping, Loeb and Leopold drove about the neighborhood of the Harvard school where Robert Franks was a pupil and selected from a number of pupils they knew several likely victims. One was Robert, another the son of Julius Rosenwald, nationally known philanthropist and a member of the directorate of the Sears Roebuck mail-order house. And the third was a son of a wealthy furniture dealer. With this decision, they arranged for the rental of a Dodge touring car from the Hertz Drive-It-Yourself station. The selection of the culvert spot for the disposal of the victim's body was the child of Leopold's ingenious brain. He knew the territory thoroughly, having been there, as he said, on many expeditions as an ornithologist. On Wednesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Leopold confessed, "We went to the rental station and obtained a car, which we said we wanted for 2 days. Dick Loeb did the driving and we went to my home, where I put on an auto robe and a pair of boots. Without any delay, we drove to the Harvard School. After circling the block several times, we spotted Robert Franks playing at the corner. We decided then that we would kill him and demand $10,000 ransom from his father. I was sitting in the back and Loeb was in the front driving. Loeb knew Robert best and called him over to our car." "What did Loeb say?" came the question from the assistant state's attorney. "He just said, 'Hey, Bobby, come here,'" was Leopold's reply. "Then he asked Robert if he wanted to play some tennis. Robert said he did, and we invited him into the car. While we were starting away, I was getting the chisel out of the pocket in the door of the car and my handkerchief out of my coat. Robert saw the chisel and asked what it was for. Loeb then took his attention away from what I was doing by drawing him into conversation. We'd gone about 2 blocks and then I decided to go ahead. I brought up the chisel and struck Robert on the head. It stunned him and he began to struggle and scream. I seized him around the neck and I clapped the handkerchief over his nose and mouth and I hit him harder with the chisel. Then he went limp. I pulled him over the back of the seat and onto the floor and covered his body with the auto robe. We drove around for about 2 hours waiting for it to get dark, meanwhile driving always in the direction of the culvert at 122nd Street. We arrived at the culvert at about 8:30 and parked the car alongside the main road. Then we stripped the body of clothes and poured the hydrochloric acid over the face. I put my boots on and we carried the body to the culvert. I stood in the water and placed the body close up against the culvert's support, and when I was sure it would not float away in the water, we went back to the car. It was at this time, I think, that my glasses dropped out of my coat pocket." The deed finished, the 2 dastardly murderers proceeded back to the city, stopping en route to bury the boys' clothes in a large prairie. Arriving home, they parked the rental car in Leopold's yard. Then, with a calm air, the pair retired to the dining room of the Leopold home and played several rounds of casino. Later, Loeb bade his friend good night and went home to bed. Leopold followed his example shortly afterward. In the interim, he had stepped out to a drugstore and telephoned the Franks home, informing Mrs. Franks in credible English of the kidnapping of her son. On surveying the car early the next morning, Leopold discovered bloodstains on the back of the seat, the car's floor, and the running board. He also found blood spots on the auto robe. Some of the spots he managed to obliterate. Failing in his efforts to clean the robe, Leopold took it to the nearest lake and burned it. On his way back, he returned the rental car and paid the charges. It was Loeb, he said, who called the Franks home the following day and announced the ransom letter with its instructions was en route. In addition, Loeb called from the Ross drugstore notifying Mr. Edelson that a cab would come to pick up Mr. Franks. Shortly afterward, both heard of the finding of the boy's body and promptly forgot the ransom negotiations with Mr. Franks, although they had already been discouraged in this with the failure of the father to appear at the drugstore. Both then went home to bask in the secretive glory of murderers who were never caught. Such was the tenor of the confession. So read the document that was passed among the congregation of reporters in the old criminal court building. It was a reading of achievement for Mulroy and Goldstein. With weary steps, they made their way out of the building towards home, there to regain dire-needed sleep, and there to invoke the blessing of Providence on their efforts the next day to pass a $135 cab bill on to the city editor. So thoroughly were the master murderers incriminated that it was conceded at once that no lawyer in the state of Illinois, however brilliant or cunning, could be even remotely instrumental in sparing their necks from the deadly embrace of the hangman's hemp. Swiftly were the two conducted through the mill of criminal procedure, so that on being brought to actual justice they would not have had neither the mood nor the time to think of escape from the consequences of their act. A month gone in a flash, and Richard Loeb and Nathan Leopold stood before Judge John R. Caverly in the criminal court, answering to the people of the state for the murder of one of its youths. To Clarence Darrow, the apostle of humanity, the champion of the underdog, was given the title of Chief Counsel for the defense, something in the opinion of the press and the public that existed in no sense at all at the present time for Leopold and Loeb. The defense offered by Clarence Darrow is now famous literature today. Daring in its application of the case at hand, utterly radical in its sense of justice, the Darrow defense, on top of all its concession to the charges of the state, and nothing was denied, nevertheless withstood the terrific hammerings of the prosecution with facts, facts, facts. Someone has said that Darrow did no more than sing the intellectual blues for his clients who read the super philosophy of Nietzsche and the grotesque comedies of Rabelais at one sitting. Whatever he did, the effect brought a so thoroughly aroused public indignation on the head of Judge Caverly that the worthy man was almost forced to flee the city to escape the torment at the hands of friends as well as enemies. That something of Clarence Darrow's sufficed at any rate for Leopold and Loeb and for their grieving relatives. Judge Caverly himself was moved to run counter to a fierce sentiment, and he saved the defendants from the gallows by sentencing them to prison. For the murder they got life imprisonment, and for the kidnapping 99 years. The sentences to run concurrently, oddly enough. For weeks afterwards, Judge Caverly was the target of editorial writers, priests, rabbis, ministers, and toastmasters, not a few remarks being made publicly, passed on by some of his intimate friends, too. Obviously money. The money that was able to purchase great legal talent prevented two heirs from taking what certainly would have otherwise been a death march. A large, perhaps negligible part of the public misconstrued application of the term money to the success of the defense. To them it meant that the judge was bribed. But nothing is more unreasonable and out of the question. Judge Caverly's integrity was above reproach. Leopold, with all his academic genius, became a trusty acting clerk and assistant to the prison chaplain at Joliet Penitentiary, while Loeb labored in the rattan factory. But very little news of them ever leaked out. They received one annual holiday when they were permitted to see one relative for a few hours. And gradually, the crime of the century became just another sordid entry in the long annals of American true crime history, destined to spawn books, movies, and, likely, more than one podcast episode. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here with me. Remember to check out Hillbilly Horror Stories Halloween special, and on Thursday, October 27th, not only will there be a new Kinda Murdery story, but remember to go listen to British Murders, where I'll tell Stuart the very murdery story of Dr. Holly Harvey Crippen. It's going to be a Kinda Murdery episode of British Murders, so please do check it out. I appreciate you all very much. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. If you've enjoyed today's Kinda Murdery, please tell your friends and family. Tell strangers. Leave a review. It's the best way to ensure that I can keep telling that special brand of bizarre and terrible tales that you'll only find here on Kinda Murdery.